Well, hello. Welcome to today's deep dive where we are unpacking the gem that is Lily Allen's West End girl and her messy and very scandalous divorce from Stranger Things, David Harbour, aka let's just call him Satan for now. We're going to unpack everything through the lens of both astrology and relational dynamics today. We're looking at their synastry, their composite chart, and even the progressed composite chart for all the cosmic tea. A real deep dive into one of the most salacious breakups in millennial history. So without further ado, this is a classic tale of ego and entanglement and what happens when we open a mysterious Duane Reade bag with the handles tied. So we're going to mix some cosmic insight with some very real human behavior and yes, a little humor because this story is screaming for it. You have to laugh. So grab your Eggo waffles, guys. Grab your hundreds of Trojans and probably a vape because this is about to get strange. First, a quick refresher. Lily Allen, the British pop sensation, a sharp-tongued lyricist known for her very visual storytelling. She has a reputation for honesty and vulnerability in her music, often using personal experiences as creative fuel. Lily is a Taurus sun, a Libra moon, a Mercury and Venus in Aries, and a Mars in Gemini. So she's grounded, she's fiery, she's communicative, and she needs a partner who can keep up intellectually and emotionally. David Harbour, aka Satan, is known to the world as Chief Hopper from Stranger Things. And he's super intensely plutonic with his Aries moon opposite Pluto. He's spoken publicly about having bipolar disorder. You know, a chart cannot diagnose someone, but this is, the normal aspect that we see in charts with people who struggle with bipolar disorder. The moon is our emotions. Pluto is our health spot. And when they're in opposition, we are going back and forth. What does that sound like to you? So this dude is the definition of act first and think later with his Aries stellium and his Mars, which is, our sexuality, our drive, how we're going to go after it, at what we call the anoretic or critical degree of Aquarius. So it's a little strange. It's a little unusual. It needs to feel free. And it's kind of like having the oven on broil when we have something at a critical anoretic degree. So before we super dive into these charts, let's go backwards just a little bit and just, some history from people who are kind of new to understanding who Lily Allen and David Harbour are. So Lily Allen and David Harbour, they came together really fast in total Mars kind of energy, right? He's got that Mars stellium. Everything is Aries in his chart, pretty much. So they came together the kind of fast that actually makes people raise eyebrows. They first met in 2019. Supposedly they met on the app Raya. They hit it off, and by 2020 they were married. And part of that speed came from, the COVID pandemic, as the lockdowns compressed life, and suddenly what would normally take years, it happened in months. And so it wasn't quite all that unusual during the pandemic for these types of couples to come together. So Lily Allen, she moved in after 6 months, juggling her own children and, stepping into someone else's life while her world was kind of on pause for him. Red flag, right? Anyone who's been in a relationship with a narcissist, you already kind of can tell where this story is going. So by the time that they tied the knot, later that year, the relationship hadn't really been tested outside of the pressure cooker of a global pandemic. So it was rushed, it was intense, and in some ways it's kind of inevitable that, friction would follow once the world started spinning normally again. So he has this Aries Mercury, and it's square to Saturn, and he has a Mars trine to Uranus. So his chart gives him, a lot of charm, a lot of persuasive energy. intense emotional gravity, but also a level of like unpredictability and criticism and a lot of compulsive patterns, as we're going to dive into later. So he's described the moment that he realized that he loved Lily, centering himself in the story as if that's all that freaking mattered, as narcissists tend to do. He recalls their third date, a phase where he thought brutal honesty really kind of equaled depth. And he told her things about his life and about his beliefs, and she was really open to it. So in his retelling, he thought, wow, that's somebody I want to be around. There's nothing in that memory about how it landed on her or like how it shaped her own feelings or her own boundaries. It was all about him. So fans began speculating that the marriage was in trouble when Lily unfollowed him on Instagram back in October of 2023, barely a month after they supposedly celebrated 3 years of marriage. So soon after, reports emerged that they'd been living apart for some time. So Lily Allen was in London for a play, and David Harbour was in New York. And according to an insider, Lily and David had been barely together for the past 3 months up until that point, and had been living separate lives. In her downtime, Lily would be with her mates in London or with her kids. And when she went back to the US with them, there was no sign of David. So the distance, both physical and emotional, had become impossible to ignore. David Harbour has spoken out about having bipolar disorder, as we said earlier. And again, the moon opposite Pluto is this classic marker for this struggle. But psychologically, this configuration, it often shows up as like this profound kind of like a mood alteration, right? We oscillate between good and negative feelings. So there's a heightened sensitivity to like abandonment or to control when we have moon Pluto, and it's kind of an internal pressure cooker where like feelings are like never mild but always tidal. So it mirrors the lived experience that many with bipolar disorder describe, periods of depth and despair, or like psychic compression followed by surges of power, vitality, or meaning making. So the danger is not the intensity itself, but the isolation it can create when a person feels like very ruled by forces inside of them that they didn't choose. It can be kind of a doozy to live with. Not that that's an excuse for any of his behavior, but I digress. The divorce came after 4 years, and the cracks widened at that point. So trust eroded, boundaries blurred, and what began as this like whirlwind, romance gave way to the realities of like betrayal and disappointment and emotional exhaustion. So COVID may have like sped up their story, but it really didn't protect them from like the hard truth that love rushed is really fragile. And even the most exciting beginnings can really end in heartbreak when the context shifts and the masks drop. So we're looking at a few charts today. When you look at a natal chart, you're actually looking at one person in isolation. It describes how someone experiences the world, how they process emotion, power, intimacy, fear, desire. It's not about what happens between people. It's about what someone brings into every room that they enter, including their patterns, their defenses, their longings, and their unconscious material. So a natal chart does not change the situation, right? It shows how one person responds to whatever situation they're in. Now, synastry is what happens when two natal charts are placed together. And this is where attraction and friction and projection and chemistry really show up. So synastry really explains, why two people trigger each other in very specific ways. It can show relational dynamics. It shows who kind of activates whose wounds, who feels seen, who feels threatened, who feels destabilized, who feels soothed, and how. So Synastry is intensely personal because it's about how two inner worlds collide. So it can feel like dramatic because it highlights stimulation or obsession, emotional hooks, but it doesn't describe the relationship itself as a living entity. It only shows the exchange. Now, a composite chart is different because it really treats the relationship as its own living organism. Instead of like focusing on how the individuals interact, it really shows the emotional climate, the power dynamics, the identity of the relationship itself. So this is the chart of like what gets created when these two people come together. Composite charts can sometimes feel surprisingly calm or muted, even when the people involved feel overwhelmed, because the composite shows the structure of the bond rather than the internal experience of being inside it. So this is often where people feel confused when the lived experience doesn't match the chart. Now, the progressed composite is where timing and psychological development enter the picture. While the composite shows the relationship's blueprint, the progressed composite, it shows that, how that blueprint is being activated right now based on inner growth or stress, maturity, any unresolved material that each person is like carrying into the present moment. So this is why progressed composites often explain intensity or rupture, obsession or crisis, far better than, the static composite alone. They reflect how the relationship is being experienced in real time, not just what it was designed to be. So this is often where the truth of the current moment lives. I was honestly surprised by their composite chart. When you listen to this album, what you hear is friction and competition, shock, a kind of trauma bonding that feels really raw and volatile. And the composite itself is kind of relatively tame. It doesn't fully explain the intensity of what we're hearing. There's some stuff we'll get into later, for bickering, but that gap actually really feeds into a theory I have about astrology, which is that the composite chart shows the relationship as like an object, but it doesn't always capture how the people inside of it are experiencing it in real time. And that's where the progressed composite really matters more to me. So progressions reflect how each person has grown internally up until this moment and how that inner development activates the relationship now. They speak to the present tense of the bond rather than its blueprint. So when you look at the progressed composite for their relationship, that's where everything just kind of suddenly explodes, right? It's a Jackson Pollock, right? Suddenly the struggle, the pressure, the destabilization, and the emotional intensity make complete sense. Lyrically, Lily highlights the ways in which her abuser's actions leave, lingering self-doubt and hypervigilance and a real desperate need for validation. So, this album functions almost clinically in that it is a blueprint of the emotional stages that victims go through, from infatuation to love bombing to shock to realization to confrontation, and finally, hopefully reclaiming yourself. It's heartbreak music on this one level. But on another, it's an unflinching study of how a narcissistic partner operates, and the survivor navigates the aftermath in such a beautiful way. So today we're breaking it all down track by track. So first up is the self-titled track, West End Girl. So we open with West End Girl. This is the first track, and immediately the emotional stakes are clear. Lily sings about moving to New York, and now we're all here. We've moved to New York. We found a nice little rental near a sweet little school, and now I'm looking at houses with 4 or 5 floors, and you found us a brownstone and said you want it, it's yours. On the surface, it sounds like a Cinderella moment, very romantic. But underneath, we see textbook isolating behavior. She leaves her home of London for this man, her friends, her family, her support network, and she enters a new life orbiting him as if he is like the freaking sun himself. Her Taurus sun, it really craves stability, and her Libra moon, it craves harmony. But Mercury and Venus in Aries push her to speak her truth, to assert herself even as she's being pushed into unfamiliar terrain. David's Pluto in Libra on her moon, the place of home and family and safety, it's already creating intensity. It's grabbing her safety net and really transforming her entire surroundings, including her home. So their synastry with the Moon-Pluto aspect in a conjunction is really being quite highlighted here. He has, again, that opposition, and we're going to gravitate towards people who have planets that are making that aspect in our synastry charts a lot of times. So it's like a moth to a flame. So his natal moon opposite Pluto heightens the emotional pressure. Early experiences often carry a feeling of emotional exposure with this aspect or survival mode, as if love was tied to control or loss or high stakes. So there's usually this heightened sensitivity to emotional undercurrents in other people, which can feel like a gift and a burden at the same time. You read the room instinctively, but that awareness can keep your nervous system on high alert. So this is an aspect that often points to formative relationships where emotional needs were met inconsistently or with conditions attached. Care may have come with pressure or secrecy or unspoken expectations, teaching you early that closeness can be consuming or even dangerous. So as a result, attachment patterns can really swing between craving deep fusion and fiercely protecting one's independence. Trust is not given lightly. It's tested, sometimes unconsciously, to see who will stay when things get raw. So this placement tends to experience attachment as all or nothing. When, they feel emotionally threatened or abandoned or powerless in a relationship, they may unconsciously seek to control, the other person. So cheating, when it happens, is not casual or impulsive. It's often very much emotionally charged or secretive or tied to feeling desired or chosen or regaining a sense of power after, feeling emotionally exposed or diminished. More commonly than physical cheating, there can be emotional cheating with this. Deep confidences that are shared outside of the relationship, private bonds that feel intense or consuming, or creating a hidden emotional world that gives them leverage or safety. This allows closeness without full risk, which can feel safer to the nervous system than direct honesty with a partner. His Mercury is square to Saturn, and so it begins to really show his teeth here, critique, belittlement, being kind of like a rigid thinker. That's David Harbour right there, Mercury square to Saturn. And so this is the first hint of tension, love bombing paired with subtle control. And when Lily sings, "I could never afford this," you were pushing it forward, it made me feel a little bit awkward. You can feel that collision, generosity, yeah, but also manipulation, which keeps her off balance. And David, he has that Mars in Aquarius. That's the sign of forward movement, and it's at a critical 29 degrees. So he's going to have the oven on broil of this particular energy. It's slightly volatile. It can show up as, sudden shifts of direction or an urgency to live life according to, an internal code rather than external expectations. So she sings, "I walk up the stoop, I put the key in the door, and then my phone started ringing, so I answered the call. And they were like, hey, you got the lead in the play. You've got to be back in London for rehearsals in May. And later that evening, you said, how was my day? And I said, I got some news. I got the lead in the play. And that's when your demeanor started to change. You said I'd have to audition. I said, you're deranged. And I thought that was quite strange. So what stands out in that moment is not, just his competitiveness, which clearly he is, little man, but control. Her success immediately destabilizes him. Instead of, celebrating or even neutrally kind of witnessing it with her, he moves to undermine it, telling her that she would have to audition when she'd already been offered the lead. It's like a classic reality distortion, one of many. So it reframes her lived experience as questionable and positions him as kind of the arbiter of what's real, what's earned, or what's valid. Very Mercury square Saturn. So that's gaslighting in its clearest form, because it introduces doubt at the exact moment that she should feel totally grounded and affirmed. And this is where Mars trine to Uranus shows up psychologically rather than romantically. He reacts fast, he reacts instinctively and defensively when something disrupts the existing power dynamic. So Uranian energy, it can't tolerate feeling outpaced or even made irrelevant, especially by someone close. So instead of sitting with the discomfort of her forward movement, he reaches for disruption. The goal is not truth. The goal is to regain footing by destabilizing hers. So it is an abrupt assertion of dominance, and it's disguised as logic or realism, which is very Saturnine. At the end of the song, our girl is in London, and she's on a FaceTime call, and she's learning that David, who is still in the US, is sharing with Lily that he's been with another fucking woman. And what makes it so particularly corrosive is the timing. He doesn't challenge her in neutral movement. He waits until her joy enters the room. That tells you the issue is not skepticism, but he sees her as a threat. Her independence, her recognition, her separate trajectory, it really activates something primal in him. So rather than, being, an emotionally mature man, rather than saying, I feel scared you're moving beyond me, he says you're wrong about your own life. And that move, it shifts the focus from his insecurity to her supposed unreliability. And the pattern often escalates. If left unchecked, it trains the other person to shrink their joy, to soften their achievements, or preemptively doubt themselves to keep the relationship stable. And that's how emotional control works, guys. Not through overt prohibition, but through the subtle punishment of autonomy. That strangeness that she feels in the moment, that's her intuition clocking the rupture between love and rivalry. And I have been there, girl. It sucks. Her body knows before her mind does, as it often does. Our bodies, our intuition are here to protect us, especially as women. And she knows something is fucking off. So that ending completes the pattern. What begins as undermining her success, it ends in betrayal delivered at maximum emotional distance. He waits until she is physically removed, newly expanded, and alone in a foreign place. Then he introduces the rupture. That timing matters. It's not accidental. It is a way of reclaiming power when he can no longer interrupt her movement directly. If he cannot stop her, he's going to destabilize her. Telling her over FaceTime while she's in London is not just a confession. It's an intrusion. He inserts himself into her movement of autonomy and her achievement and forces her nervous system back into relationship drama. This is how control persists, especially after a physical separation. The body is still hooked even when geography changes. The message underneath is you may have gone forward, but I can still reach you. I've been there. It fucking sucks. The cheating itself, it functions less as a desire and more as regulation. He feels eclipsed. He feels left behind. He feels irrelevant. And another woman becomes a tool a tool to restore a sense of potency. Then he hands Lily that information, not to just be honest, but to reestablish hierarchy. Look what I did while you were gone. Look what you missed. Look how replaceable you are. That's not remorse. That's retaliation. Psychologically, this is a classic split between intimacy and being an individual. When Lily moves towards her own life, he moves towards rupture. He can't hold her closeness and her independence at the same time. What a small fucking man. So he creates a crisis that recenters the emotional gravity around him. Even in betrayal, he ensures that he is still on the axis. Now, what makes this, so particularly corrosive is not only just the timing and the undermining and the gaslighting, especially after the love bombing, but the fact that she's trying to move forward with something. She's in London. The call happens, but the movement has already occurred. The song does not end with her returning or collapsing. It ends with the truth landing while she's already elsewhere. And that's like the quiet power of the narrative. Control loses its grip the moment forward motion becomes irreversible. That brings us to the song after West End Girl, Ruminating. So, Ruminating captures Lily lying awake, obsessing over him and another woman. The lyrics depict her mind spinning, replaying conversations, and wondering what's real. Moon on his Pluto makes her emotionally magnetized to him, intensifying this obsessiveness. Mercury trine Neptune explains his ability to spin a narrative that's simultaneously compelling and confounding. And this kind of dives into song number 3, which is Sleepwalking. Lily sings, "You won't love me. You won't leave me. You won't touch me, but you're still so needy. And I don't know if you do it intentionally, but somehow you make it my fault. You don't stop talking, and I'm just sleepwalking." So first and foremost, David's Mercury in Aries is conjunct Jupiter, the planet of expansion. So yeah, dude's a yapper. You will not love me means emotional absence. You will not leave me means refusal to relinquish the control. Together, they describe a bind where intimacy is withheld, but separation is denied. That is one of the most destabilizing relational dynamics because there's no action and, it just hurts. Leaving isn't allowed. The relationship just becomes like a holding cell rather than a bond. You don't touch me paired with it, still being needy. It exposes the core hypocrisy. And this is so common in narcissistic relationships. Physical and emotional withdrawal coexist with constant demand. He requires assurance, attention, emotional labor, while offering no embodied presence in return. How many of us, women, have gone through this in our relationships? Even in our healthiest relationships, we are always carrying more of the emotional labor. So David, here he is, bringing nothing to the game. And this creates exhaustion and confusion. Her body is starved while her psyche is overworked. So neediness here is not vulnerability. It's consumption without reciprocity. When she says she doesn't know if he does it intentionally, that being ambiguous is crucial. Abuse doesn't require conscious cruelty to be damaging. I need to say that again because a lot of people don't realize this. Abuse does not require conscious cruelty to be damaging. The uncertainty itself, it keeps her looping. If it were intentional, she could leave in anger. If it's unintentional, she feels responsible to explain, to soothe, to fix. And that gray area is where self-blame takes root for so many women. Somehow you make it my fault. It names the mechanism. His emotional deficits are reframed as her failures. She's too sensitive. Have you ever been told that by a lover or a family member? You're not. If somebody wants less, they can go find it, right? Too demanding, too ambitious, too much. The burden of repair, it's quietly transferred onto her, even though it's his problem. The line about him not stopping talking while she's sleepwalking, this captures the power imbalance in its most visceral form. He controls the narrative. He explains. He rationalizes. He reframes. Words keep flowing. They keep filling space, preventing clarity. And meanwhile, she's disassociated. Sleepwalking is not being passive. It's survival. Her system has learned that fully waking up inside this dynamic would be too painful or too destabilizing. So it just numbs, it compiles, and it keeps moving. And what makes this moment so devastating is its simplicity. There's no metaphor here, no distance. Just a direct inventory of neglect and blame and psychological fog. So this is the point in the song where the listener understands that the betrayal at the end is not, just the big issue. This is about domination. And the other one is going to survive by going numb. The tragedy is not that she was unaware. It's that she was aware and kept going anyway, because the structure of the relationship trained her to doubt her own need for more. Now, with Juno retrograde in Virgo at 28 degrees in Lily's chart, the dynamic often feels like being an apprentice to your partner, constantly striving to meet exacting standards and to organize every detail of the relationship. It can be consuming, as if your energy is tied up in perfecting the partnership rather than it flowing naturally. And you might feel, if you have this, more like a caretaker or a manager rather than an equal partner in the relationship. There's a sense of meticulous duty where love and service, it blurs. And boundaries can feel really blurred because the relationship becomes a project that demands constant attention. My mother had this exact placement. David Harbour's chart, it looks a lot like my dad. So I know this dynamic kind of well. It fucking sucks. Now, Mercury squared to Saturn in his chart, it explains the belittling and the rigid communication, while the moon opposite Pluto explains the emotional weight, the sense that nothing is ever calm. Lily's Aries Mercury and Venus, they're screaming to her, assert yourself, assert yourself. But his plutonic pull, it keeps her trapped in emotional intensity. This is a vivid portrait of narcissistic tactics. Verbal dominance and sleep deprivation, that's a huge one. One of the most common things that we notice with narcissistic abuse is simply, the narcissistic partner not letting their partner sleep, right? Exhausting them. And then that creates guilt, all designed to keep her reactive and off balance. It's exhausting. And that brings us to tennis. It's on tennis that we finally reveal a new character that's critical in this story, Madeline. Now, presumably, back in New York, Lily is settled back into their life in the US, having done the play. Again, this is all about David in this story. He's coming home, he's jet lagged, he's miserable, and in typical Taurus fashion, this starts in their proper English kitchen that we saw now in the infamous Architectural Digest video. And so I love that, by the way, So David seems to be less than enthusiastic about this comfortable meal that, Lily being the Taurus, she's trying to make everything cozy and comfortable. And she sings, you showed me a photo on Instagram and but it was how you grabbed your phone back right out of my hands. So I read your text and now I regret it. I can't get my head around how you've been playing tennis. If it was just sex, then I wouldn't be jealous. You won't play with me. And who's Madeline? she continues, I need to be alone, so I took myself to bed. I got a lot of information that I can't even process. So I wrote a little email and I told you what I saw. And then you came up to the bedroom and you made it all my fault. But you moved the goalposts. You broken the rules. I tried to accommodate, but you took me for a fool. So I read your texts and now I regret it. I can't get my head around how you've been playing tennis. If it was just sex, I wouldn't be jealous. But you won't play with me. And who the fuck is Madeline? So this is the section where the fog lifts and the abuse becomes really evident. The song shifts from intuition to proof, and the psychological violence escalates because the proof, it really threatens the entire structure that has kept him in control. So let's talk a little bit about moving goalposts. Moving goalposts is a manipulation tactic where, the standards for approval or safety or success, they're constantly changed so the other person can never actually meet them. Just as you adapt, you improve or comply, the requirement, it quietly shifts. So what was once enough suddenly is not. So the apology was wrong, the effort was insufficient, the tone was incorrect, the timing was off. There's always something else that you could have done better or known or anticipated or fixed when we move a goalpost. This creates a permanent state of insufficiency and worthlessness, where resolution is just always out of reach. And this tactic works with narcissists because it destabilizes a sense of reality and self-trust. It's designed to get someone to feel worthless and to reinforce hierarchy. For narcissistic personalities, moving goalposts protects their fragile sense of superiority and it avoids accountability. If the rules never stay still, they're never wrong. If the target keeps moving, then you're always failing. This allows them to extract attention or emotional labor and control without ever having to offer mutual repair or satisfaction. It also keeps them in the position of judge rather than participant. They define reality while you try to scramble inside of it. So the long-term impact on the recipient is confusion and chronic self-doubt, a really deep exhaustion that feels like trying to finish a race where the finish line just keeps retreating. So many people internalize the belief that they are fundamentally defective or too much or not enough, when in reality they were just responding to an unwinnable system. The clarity often comes after distance or, when consistency returns and the body finally relaxes. This Instagram moment is small, but it's loaded. Showing her a photo is like an invitation into intimacy and shared reality. But in the way that he snatches the phone back, it reveals panic. The physical flex, it exposes secrecy before language does. Control is no longer abstract, it becomes bodily. Her crossing of that boundary by reading the text is not framed as curiosity or betrayal on her part. It's a response to having reality kind of yanked away mid-sentence. When the truth is withheld aggressively, then the nervous system goes looking for coherence. Her immediate regret after reading the text is also important. This is not satisfaction or vindication, it's overwhelm. She has, she's just been betrayed and having to metabolize everything all at once. Betrayal trauma works like this. The mind receives too much data way too fast, and it can't sequence it into meaning, right? So that's why she can't get her head around the tennis metaphor. Tennis implies back and forth, multiple players, movement. It's recreational. And Lily, who I'm pretty sure was not using this as a metaphor, but actually she's really talking about him playing tennis with another woman, this implies the fact that David isn't just having sex with this woman. He is actually doing enjoyable activities with her, things that he won't do with his own wife. So it isn't about sex. It's actually kind of about the emotional intimacy. So, especially with Lily being a Mars in Gemini longs for a twin. This is the game playing Mars. Mars is how we go after action and, how we want to be pursued. So, Lily is probably a person that wants to play Scrabble with her partner, wants to play tennis. And the fact that he won't do these basic things that you do in relationships, I think that says it all. The wound is not physical infidelity. It's exclusion. It's replacement. It's emotional withholding. You will not play with me means she'd been really deprived of reciprocity while watching him invest his energy elsewhere. This is abandonment. And, the question of Madeline, it's not really about Madeline. It's about the sudden appearance of a hidden third narrative. A name makes the betrayal real. It collapses abstraction into personhood. The repetition of her name becomes obsessive, not because Lily wants drama, but because the mind loops when meaning is withheld. So repetition is the brain trying to orient itself after rupture. Her choice to go to bed, it's an act of self-preservation. Writing the email is another attempt at regulation. She documents what she saw. She communicates clearly. This is her trying to anchor her reality before it's rewritten. Because we know, with a narcissist, it's going to be rewritten. So, the regret of reading the text is no longer about snooping. It's about seeing way too much, way too clearly. So, this is really kind of a climactic moment of the album, right? And then, of course, we are going into the song Madeline, right? And Madeline is going to be Lily's attempt to try to understand what is happening with this other woman. She sings, "I know none of this is your fault. Messaging you feels kind of assaultive. Saw your text, that's how I found out. Tell me the truth and his motives. I can't trust anything that comes out of his mouth. How long has it been going on? Is it just sex or is there emotion? He told me it would stay in hotel rooms, never be out in the open. Why would I trust anything that comes out of his mouth? We had an arrangement. Be discreet and don't be blatant. There had to be payment. It had to be with strangers. But you're not a stranger, Madeline." So here we have established that if the relationship was going to be open, which it sounds like she didn't even want that in the first place, but she agreed to this. She tried to be accommodating. It had to be with sex workers, right? It couldn't be a full-on relationship. And here he is playing tennis, having a full-on relationship with another woman. We also hear her side of the story. But she questions whether that's real or something that he fed her, like a line, right? So she is pretty confronting. You tell me that he's telling the truth. Is that a case or a line that he fed you? Want to believe you, but is it a ruse? Lie to me, babe, and I'll end you. I can't trust anything that comes out of your mouth. I'm not convinced that he didn't fuck you in our house. Do you ever talk about me? Has he told you that he doesn't love me? I bet he tells you he loves you. I've gotten old, gotten ugly. I wouldn't trust anything that comes out of his mouth. Now, why would you trust anything that comes out of his mouth? She comes back and she says that she doesn't want to get caught up in lies. She thought that this was part of their arrangement. She ends the letter in a very frustrating way where she says, "Love and light, Madeline," which makes you kind of want to cringe. And this is the section that is kind of the emotional collapse of triangulation. Lily moves from confronting him to, contacting the other woman, which only happens when the trust in the primary relationship has completely disintegrated. Reaching out feels assaultive to her because it violates her own values, her own boundaries, and she knows this woman did not cause the harm, yet the situation forces intimacy without consent. That discomfort tells you how destabilized the moral ground has become. Betrayal fractures not just trust, but one's sense of self. Her fixation on the truth and motives, it reveals how thoroughly his credibility, it's eroded by now. She's no longer asking what happened. She's not even asking what reality even is. She's just saying she can't trust him. And she's realizing that he's been distorting her reality. Everything is suspect at this point. So, the questions about duration, sex versus emotion, secrecy, they're not voyeuristic. They're attempts to rebuild a timeline so that her nervous system can reorient itself. Trauma fragments memory and sequence. Asking concrete questions is how the mind tries to stabilize after shock. The detail about hotel rooms and staying hidden reveals that there was already a compromised agreement, and this matters. The betrayal is not only infidelity, it's that the distorted terms were, very much violated. So, when Madeline speaks, the tone shifts sharply. Her responses are really calm, very reasonable, very ethically oriented. She positions herself as someone who values honesty and did not knowingly participate in this deception. And that contrast is kind of devastating. The person Lily was taught to trust most is now the least reliable voice in the room. While the supposed outsider appears grounded and transparent while she's going crazy. The worst. So her self-critical thoughts about aging and attractiveness, they're so sad to me. They're just these predictable outcomes of being blamed and being victimized and devalued over time. When someone repeatedly shifts fault, the injured person eventually turns the knife inward. That's not insecurity. That's internalized gaslighting. Madeline's final message, it closes the loop with clarity. She expresses empathy without drama and confirms the central lie. He told her that Lily consented. This is the final exposure of his pattern. He managed perceptions by telling each woman a different story, ensuring compliance through misinformation. Madeline's emphasis on honesty, it really highlights exactly what he freaking lacks. This isn't about rivalry. This is about fucking David Harbour being a fucking liar. Infidelity isn't the worst part of this story. It's the way that his actions devalued her over time. That brings us to the next song, Relapse. Lily Allen used to be a bit of a party girl. She had a reputation, and she got herself sober a number of years ago and became a better mother and started to, try to really work on herself very deeply. So when this marriage came along, I'm sure she thought, this is going to be my new life, right? I'm going to get married and my kids and I are going to live happily ever after, right? And then all of this goes down, right? This is a hard thing to stay sober through, right? Especially when you've been so devalued. I think this is the most heartbreaking part of the album for me. Lily was this tabloid sensation for most of the early 2000s. And she cited in 2019 that was the last time she drank or used substances, meaning she has maintained sobriety for most of the 2020s. In interviews, she's reflected that sobriety has changed her life so much. It's been fundamental in stabilizing her relationships, especially with her children. And now, the ground is gone beneath me, she sings. I need a drink. I need a Valium. I feel like I'm going to cry. Hear the intensity of her Taurus sun, the emotional magnetism of her moon on his Pluto, and the compulsion of trauma bonding. It collides with the clarity of sobriety. She's forced to feel the full weight of this relationship deteriorating her safety net. Being away, he pulled her away from her safety net, her friends, her family, into this new place that was on his terms. Everything was on his terms. And now she can't go back to these comforts that once soothed her when everything felt like too much. So she has to learn to sit with it. And this is so hard, especially when it's so painful. I think that this is the most tragic part of this story. But I digress, because we're about to go into one of the best songs on the record, Pussy Palace. The true highlight. Now, Pussy Palace is an amazing track. I didn't know it was your Pussy Palace. I always thought it was a dojo. Lily finally names the betrayal, exposing his double life while asserting her agency. Her Venus in Aries and Mars in Gemini. It expresses, just calling things out exactly for what they are, as she seemingly goes through his home and starts unpacking all of his secrets. The lyrics are vivid. She finds letters from other women, sex toys, the chaos of his double life. She questions if he's a sex addict. It's so devastating that it becomes funny. One of my favorite lines, hundreds of Trojans, you're so fucking broken. Genius. Lily, you are truly a wordsmith. Then she really kind of verbally decimates him in the next song, which again is one of my favorite songs on the album, 4chan Stan. She calls him 4chan Stan. I love this. What a brutal insult. I'm here for it. Right? So in 4chan Stan, what a tongue twister, Lily channels the kind of obsessive investigation that she has just done. I went through your bedside drawer. Never been to Bergdorf's, but you took someone shopping there on May 24th. Mercury in Aries, it really shines here, asking blunt and unflinching questions. You bought her handbag. It wasn't cheap. I was in London, probably asleep. This line is devastating to me. Here she is, achieving a dream that very few people get to experience in a play on the West End, and here he is, at the same time, buying expensive handbags with Madeline. This track is cathartic, it's humorous, it's a fusion of rage and clarity and boundary setting, where she publicly claims agency while unpacking betrayal in very meticulous detail, while also, roasting him. The lyrics really illustrate the obsessive unraveling of trust, the analytical, dissection of his double life. Humor, really her armor there with that Mars and Gemini, and clarity is her therapy. And then we get into non-monogamy. I don't want to fuck with anyone else. I know that's all you want to do. I'm so committed that I lose myself because I don't want to lose you, she sings. This is the trauma bond speaking out loud, not metaphorically, literally. This is what happens when devotion becomes survival strategy. Lily's Taurus sun is loyal to the point of self-erasure, especially when she believes that, this is her person, right? This is the moment where commitment stops being mutual. It starts being, self-sacrifice, really. She's not choosing non-monogamy. She's agreeing to it under emotional duress. And that distinction, it really matters. It's kind of a form of sexual assault in a way. She sings, I changed my immigration status for you to treat me like a stranger. This is so devastating. She gives up every single thing in her life, a very successful life as a pop singer, for him. She gives up her friends, her home, everything she knows, her comfort, and he can't even be faithful to her. He has to manipulate her into being in this non-monogamous relationship that she doesn't really want to be in. All she wants is him, and all he wants is the admiration of the world. It's devastating. And if that wasn't enough, he makes her question her own beauty, her own self-worth. It's sickening. So, this really speaks to this Pluto dynamic in their chart. Why do I feel like such a failure, she sings. A life with you looked good on paper. This is like internalized blame. This is what happens when someone absorbs the consequences of like another person's duplicity and like turns it inward. Mercury square Saturn shows up as, self-criticism, as we said earlier, or shame or belief that if something failed, it must be because she didn't do it right. This is so frustrating to me. It's the most dangerous part of narcissistic dynamics in a way, because it's not the cheating, it's not the gaslighting, it's when the victim starts auditing their own worth instead of like questioning the structure that they were placed inside. This track isn't about non-monogamy. It's about coercion, and it's about coercion that is disguised as progressiveness. It's about being asked to metabolize betrayal as enlightenment. It's being told that discomfort equals immaturity, right? So Lily's Mars in Gemini is trying to talk it through. It's trying to reason it out. It's trying to find the logic. But Gemini energy cannot stabilize in an environment where the truth is constantly moving, right? It needs facts. So this song sits right at the midpoint of the album for a reason. It's the moment where she realizes she's no longer choosing a relationship. She's choosing not to be abandoned. And that's not consent. That's survival. Then we have Just Enough. Just Enough was the first song that Lily Allen wrote for West End Girl. It's the first track that was created on the album's initial day of writing, and it was completed in about 3 hours, right? And it's a sad ballad. It's heartbreaking to listen to. It really is the root of everything that Lily is feeling. It's somber, it's reflective, and it's string-driven, so it's emotional, right? Lyrically, the song finds Lily on the brink of letting go, but still grasping for scraps of hope. You give me just enough hope to hold on to nothing. We've all been there. It's heartbreaking. I want to talk about the next song. Not that this song isn't beautiful and lovely, but the next song really kind of pushes the album forward, and that is Dallas Major. This is one of my favorite tracks on the record. I think that every woman approaching dating apps in midlife can relate to this one. She layers in, details that are mundane yet telling, being nearly 40, 5'2", a mother to teenage daughters, and highlights how every truth that she carries shapes her presence in this new world of dating. And, that line, 'cause I hate it here, it cuts through the bravado and makes it really clear that this is fucking uncomfortable. She's there with a mix of curiosity and anxiety, frustration. The chorus, adopting a pseudonym, it references her past fame and openly kind of acknowledges that her marriage has shifted in a way that she wasn't prepared for. But yet she's still choosing to participate on her terms, even if it's imperfect. And she's admitting that her identity and her personal life have been complicated and messy in public. There's a tension between playfulness and raw honesty that makes the song so engaging. You can feel her trying to navigate social norms or her personal desires, but also just this lingering heartbreak all at the same time. And I've been there, girl. It fucking sucks. In the context of West End Girl, Dallas Major is the moment of awkward reinvention for Lily. It's funny, it's sharp, it's really uncomfortable, but it's also deeply human and something we all can relate to. Who wants to fucking be here? Dating should just be, like an app. We can click everything that we want and then that person just shows up, right? That should be dating. Maybe it's me. Beg for Me is the next song, and again, this is a really good one. She's processing a lot of her emotions in terms of the relationship ending and where she's at. Let You Win is after that, and again, a beautiful, heartbreaking song. There's a really great line about refusing to absorb David's shame And it really reads like a Moon Pluto truth distilled into music. The song becomes like a psychic boundary, a declaration of emotional sovereignty in the face of secrecy and unprocessed guilt. With a Moon Pluto dynamic, emotions are never going to be like light or simple. They're felt in the body, they're felt in the psyche, and she's airing it out there and puts a boundary around it, right? And so I love that one. That's a good one. And then we finally hit the final song, Fruity Loop. And in Fruity Loop, she frames David not just as flawed, but as someone seeking maternal contentment. He's looking for a mother. She's identifying the emotional hunger driving his behavior, a search for care, validation, and absolution that he never really fully achieved, which in turn fueled his need to project shame and control onto others. So the song becomes both an analysis and a boundary. She sees the pattern clearly now, and she psychoanalyzes it with almost surgical precision, yet refuses to occupy that role for him. So, yeah, this is an intense moment. It's the ending of the record, and I am so glad she has drawn her boundaries to conclude this record. What a powerful statement. So I want to loop around to something that I said earlier, which is that in their composite chart, it's really not that eventful. They do have a Mercury-Mars conjunction, and since we don't have birth times, we don't really know what the rising sign is, so we don't know the house placement, so we only have to work with this. But, it could be in a trickier house, like the 8th house. That would make that, a little bit more difficult. It's funny, they say on their episode of Architectural Digest that they designed their couches so they could both face the opposite way because they quarrel with each other a lot. That's very Mercury-Mars. Mercury-Mars can be a really great aspect to have in a composite chart because it indicates that you're going to be doing a lot of movement together. So, if a couple likes to dance, if they like to exercise, it can be a great aspect to have in a composite chart. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. But when it's in Aries, and if it's in a difficult house, which I would imagine that it is, it's going to add a lot more dysfunction to the everyday, especially when it's opposite Pluto. Mercury opposite Pluto is also going to add to that paranoia that we see. Now, it's not like the easiest chart. We have the moon square to Mercury, the moon square to Mars. There's going to be a lot of everyday fighting, a lot of everyday bickering. We're going to be in each other's way. But, that seems to be a little bit of their dynamic. It's not enough to be this explosive, right? But then we get to the progressed composite. And when we see the progressed composite, it kind of makes you audibly gasp because there's a lot going on here. First and foremost, we have a grand mutable cross. Whoa. And then on top of that, we have a mystic rectangle. So let's break that down for just a moment because that's a lot of information and a lot of words. So we'll start first with the grand mutable cross. So a grand mutable cross, well, we have T-squares. T-squares are big challenges within a chart. And when we have a grand mutable cross, we have literally two T-squares that are kind of challenging one another in mutable signs. So a grand mutable cross is one of the most psychologically active and really kind of internally demanding configurations in astrology. It happens when 4 points or clusters of planets really occupy the mutable signs. So Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, Pisces. And they form this continuous grid of oppositions and squares, right? So mutable energy is all about movement and adaptation, learning and transition. So when it's locked into a cross, it really creates a life theme of a constant recalibration. So we are in this cycle of recalibration for both people. it's rarely going to be a static kind of energy. We're always going to be like adjusting to like new information, new changing like inner weather, or responding to like external demands of the outside world. So the tension, it doesn't disappear. It will kind of grow out of this energy because it's a progress chart, but it's, you know, it's going to be, especially when the outer planets are involved, it's going to be something very long lasting, like a period, like an era of a relationship, right? So yeah, there's an emotional amplification because Jupiter and the moon are conjunct here. Everything is big. Feelings will expand quickly. The intuition is strong. And there's often this like, you know, deep need for us to be, you know, to reassure ourselves, right? That like, that what is coming in information wise is accurate, right? Which is the total vibe of this record, by the way. And then being, you know, there's a Neptune square on top of that. And so that introduces like, you know, feelings of being, you know, very enmeshed. We're very porous with each other. The boundaries are very blurred. There can be, you know, a lot of psychic sensitivity, right, between the two. But we also see a lot of codependency. And then there's the opposition to the sun with Mercury. And, you know, Venus in Gemini brings the mind into like direct conflict with, you know, the emotional, intuitive bodies of both partners. You know, Gemini wants to analyze, to explain, to name, to narrate the experience, right? It wants options. It wants language, right? And when opposed by a Moon-Jupiter conjunction, there can be a feeling of living between like the head and the heart, or between facts and feelings. So we have to talk our way through emotions with this, right? And that is literally what this record is doing. The square to Saturn in Virgo, you know, that also is a lot of the criticism that we see, the karma of all of this. So it is an intense progressed composite chart. So we have if I saw this, I would be like, wow, these nervous systems are crazy, right? Like this is an intense chart. And then on top of that, we have a mystic rectangle, and a mystic rectangle can give a sense of fatedness to a relationship. Like this is something karmic that was meant to happen, which totally feels like this relationship and this record and how people are coming out and connecting with it, you know, regardless of, you know, you've been in a non-monogamous relationship or not. I think every woman can relate to this record because it's a classic record about narcissistic abuse. So, you know, this is a moment. This is truly like a moment right now, right? Like, so that feels very much a mystic rectangle. So I wanted to share this because I think that this is like a valid thing to meditate on and leave you guys with, is that, you know, a composite chart's always going to show you the relationship, but a progressed composite chart is going to show you the moment. And so that's something to just always be aware of, especially in relationships where we, you know, are close to someone for a long period of time, like family relationships, like romantic relationships. You know, we're going to be together 20, 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. We're going to go through a lot together, and we're going to have moments that are good and moments that are more complicated, and, you know, moments where we face, you know, challenges together. So looking at a progressed composite is always really interesting to see how you're going to navigate challenge together throughout a relationship. So yeah, just a lot to think about. So I thought this would be, you know, a great moment to teach something, like a teachable moment for you guys, while also talking a little bit about something that is a bit of a deep dive on a musical topic that is a little bit scandalous and of the moment. So I hope that you guys enjoyed today's episode. Let me know in the comments your thoughts, and if you learned something new today. Everyone, take care, and I hope you have a great new year.